Howdy there, Isaac here. It's once again time to continue the story of what if Izuku Midoriya had Earthbending. Last part had a bit of a cliffhanger, so I'll keep this short, but quick recap time. Izuku Midoriya in part 2 beat Bakugo in the combat training, and revealed that Bakugo was pushing himself too hard. Of course, there's more to that, but you guys already watched that last part, right? Anyways, the events of USJ still happened, except Izuku couldn't create a whirlpool and so had to raise earth walls to cut off the water villains. Fortunately, this caused the villains to notice the students and charge them while Aizawa was preoccupied by Shigaraki. Today, we're going to try something a little different. This video will have a like goal of 10 likes. When we hit that, I'll make part 4. We resume our story now. Aizawa looked on as a group of villains charged towards his students, but he couldn't help, not with the final boss fighting him. Aizawa would punch Shigaraki away before charging towards the other villains. Unfortunately, a large black bird would step in the way. Aizawa would use his quirk on Nomu before throwing his scarf at it, but Nomu would ignore this before grabbing Aizawa by the neck. Nomu would then slam Aizawa into the ground, injuring him even more. Shigaraki would kneel down next to Aizawa. "Oh, and by the way, hero, I am not the final boss." Meanwhile, Izuku was busy taking out the lower level villains. After using a few earth pillars to knock a few down, his lower arms were quickly turning to stone. Sue and Mineta had since moved behind Izuku, but there were still 2 villains left, and to make matters worse, the water villains had made it through the walls he had raised up. There were less of them, but it was still a big group. Shigaraki turned his attention to the students as Aizawa got crushed by Nomu. Kurogiri would then appear, telling Shigaraki that Ida had gotten away, because that, like in canon, would still happen. This news, as well as seeing Izuku take out a few water villains, would cause Shigaraki to absolutely flip. He'd quickly start scratching his neck before monologuing, "Kurogiri, you fool. There's no way we could win with dozens of pros here. It's game over for us." His scratching would then stop as he watched the 3 students. His eyes grew wide as a smile appeared underneath his mask. Hand mask. "But before we leave, let's make sure to break the symbol of peace. Let's make sure he never forgets us." But before Shigaraki could run towards Izuku, he'd see a tall, red object run at him. Fortunately, Shigaraki could dodge, but Kurogiri wasn't so lucky. He got caught by Bakugo. Unlike in canon, Bakugo was way faster and took care of the villains as quickly as Todoroki, but didn't take time to interrogate them. So naturally, he'd arrive way earlier than in canon. Shigaraki would look around, seeing Izuku fight off the villains, and seeing Bakugo holding Kurogiri hostage. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Not at all. Now Shigaraki had an itch, but it wasn't on his neck. It was more than that. He had an itch to decay all of these students, as well as All Might. Shigaraki ignored Bakugo's threats and charged Kirishima, who was way too slow to react. Shigaraki would grab onto Kirishima's face, quickly decaying it, but luckily, Kirishima's hardening saved him, only momentarily though. Shigaraki was smiling as he expected blood to start pouring out, but the opposite happened. Kirishima's skin only got harder. "You really are cool, Eraserhead." Like in canon, Eraserhead had just barely looked up and erased Shigaraki's quirk. Nomu then proceeded to smash Aizawa's head into the ground, knocking him out completely. Kirishima would take advantage of the situation and hit Shigaraki away. If it was anyone else, they would have been screwed. That was it. Izuku was busy, and Bakugo had to hold down the warp guy, so Kirishima had to take out the boss. This was his fight. Kirishima was scared, but that wasn't manly. A real man wouldn't have fear. Crimson Riot wouldn't. So, neither should he. Kirishima charged at Shigaraki, screaming as he did so. Shigaraki was done, though. He didn't want to deal with him anymore. Nomu! Suddenly, Nomu jumped in front of Shigaraki, grabbing onto Kirishima's arm, snapping it like a twig. But before Nomu could finish the job, All Might would appear, striking down the remaining small fry villains and saving Aizawa, as well as Kirishima. He'd also hit the Nomu, but it'd have almost zero effect, other than releasing Kirishima. All Might would zoom around the battlefield, piling up all the students with Bakugo, telling them to stay there until the other pros arrived. Shigaraki would notice how All Might has slowed down and analyze the situation. They needed Kurogiri back. Nomu, get Kurogiri. All Might would save Bakugo like in canon, taking a hit from Nomu. Kurogiri would warp away next to Shigaraki as Nomu fought All Might. Shigaraki would look at the kids. He believed Nomu could take out All Might, but those kids could possibly help him out. Kurogiri, let's kill those kids. The two would charge the students, Kurogiri sending out a large dark cloud to blind them. Bakugo would blast the mist away only to see Shigaraki right in front of him. All Might would try to stop them, only for Nomu to get in the way and bear hug him. All Might would watch on as Bakugo blasted himself away, making distance between Shigaraki and himself. By now, a few of the villains that Izuku knocked out began to stand up. Among them were Stitchman, Water Claw Guy, and Gorilla Arms. These three joined Shigaraki and began to fight the students. In only seconds, the situation had escalated. Todoroki had joined the battle, almost completely freezing Kurogiri. Stitchman had been fighting Sue and had actually knocked her out, which Izuku had been fearing this since it could create a hostage situation. All Might had been watching all of this. His students being in danger, and him unable to do anything, held up by the Nomu, and the villains seemingly winning. It was all unacceptable. All Might began to break Nomu's hold, making Nomu screech out, but All Might paid no attention to it. He kicked the bird away, rocketing toward Shigaraki, but Nomu was fast, meeting All Might in the middle of the battlefield. The two clashed, throwing stronger punches than before, causing the villains and students to be blown apart. All Might was going all out. No, he was going even further. He was giving 110%. This was for his students, and he wasn't going to let these villains win. Kurogiri, Shigaraki, Stitchman, and the water villain watched on as All Might fought against Nomu. I will not be defeated today. The symbol of peace will not fade, thought All Might as he punched the Nomu, overwhelming it. Izuku watched on, his arms and legs weighing him down as they had turned to stone. All Might was really giving it his all, and he was winning. The pair continued, one or the other occasionally being thrown or punched into the air before All Might slammed Nomu into the ground. As the villain bounced up, he punched it into the sky, showing everyone what it meant to go beyond, plus ultra. And just like that, there were only 4 villains left, 2 of which were pretty weak. Kurogiri couldn't get the ice off of his leg, and Shigaraki couldn't kill All Might himself. He cheated, Shigaraki would say as he began to scratch at his neck. All Might would still bluff, like in canon. He was out of time and was now stalling. Luckily, Kurogiri would tell Shigaraki that All Might was weakened and that they could still kill him. Izuku knew this was bad and that he was the only one who could help. But what could he do? The mist guy could warp through any of the walls he'd raise up. And if All Might hit Shigaraki, and Shigaraki was fine, what could Izuku hit him with? The 4 villains charged All Might with Kurogiri lagging behind a bit. Izuku, in a last-ditch attempt, slammed his knee onto the ground, raising up earth spikes a couple meters in front of All Might. But Kurogiri warped right through them, only to be hit by a half-raised earth wall. That was all Izuku could do. By now the stone had spread upwards of his knees all the way up to his torso, and he couldn't risk turning his torso to stone. Shigaraki jumped over the wall and dove towards All Might, his hands reaching out to grab his face. However, just before Shigaraki touched him, a bullet would be fired into each of his shoulders, sending him back. The other two villains would stop in their tracks behind Shigaraki. The pros were here, and each of them would quickly dispatch the other small fry villains. Shigaraki would back up. This was game over. The pros were here. Shigaraki would suggest retreating before getting completely wasted by Snipe. Kurogiri would wrap around Shigaraki and the two other villains by proxy. Before they warped away, Shigaraki would vow that he'd kill All Might someday. And like that, they had just survived. As the smoke around All Might began to swell, he'd thank Izuku. He had bought All Might just the right amount of seconds. Without Izuku, he'd be dead. The students would all breathe a sigh of relief in their own ways, some weeping, some silent, some yelling out. Izuku, he cried for the first time since he was a child. He was just glad that everyone was going to be okay. But of course, he didn't let Bakugo or anyone else see, other than All Might. Cementoss would come in and wall off All Might, which was a strange sight to see. Izuku and Cementoss had pretty similar powers. Kirishima and Aizawa would be hospitalized, but the others would be rounded up and shipped off to UA like in canon. The villains made a mistake attacking this class. They were strong, and this traumatic event would only make them even stronger heroes. At least, that's what All Might believed. Meanwhile, in a place far away, Shigaraki, Stitchman, and the water villain would all appear in an old but oddly comforting bar. Stitchman would look around before feeling himself for injuries. "Holy crap! We're alive! We made it!" Shigaraki would turn to see them, surprised that there were any pawns who were transported with him. "What are you two doing here?" Shigaraki would say, a sharp tone in his voice. "Oh, they were next to you when you were injured. I figured I'd take them with us. Having allies are always better than being alone. Unfortunately, I couldn't save anyone else." Shigaraki would turn his attention to Kurogiri, a fiery anger in his eyes. Yelled someone in the room. All four of the villains looked to the computer screen that was on. Shigaraki would say that the Nomu was defeated, mentioning that the symbol of peace was strong and healthy. "No, we simply underestimated them. We were not prepared enough. We didn't have the proper power," a voice would say from the monitor. "Power. That's right. There were several children who were very strong and fast. If they hadn't gotten in the way, we might have been able to kill All Might," Shigaraki would say, his hand clenched tightly. "You have regrets. Good. Remember that. Gather the elites. Take your time. We cannot move freely. That's why we need you, Tomura Shigaraki." Shigaraki would remember his master's words. He'd do as he said. For now, he needed to gather the elite, but how? He might as well start with the three he has now. As Kurogiri tended to Shigaraki's wounds, he'd eye down the other two villains. Initially, Stitchman had freaked out, saying that all his friends were captured and that the pay wasn't worth it. The water villain, who revealed his name was Trench, was very silent, a stoic person like Kurogiri. "Shigaraki, we're going to get revenge, right? You have a plan, right? We're going to free my friends and kill All Might. Just say how." Shigaraki was growling as Stitchman kept asking questions. It wasn't that he was annoying, it was that he was asking questions that Shigaraki had no answers to. If he could move properly, he'd probably have killed Stitchman by now. Kurogiri noticed Shigaraki's anger and leaned over to whisper into his ear. "Calm down. We need all the allies we can get, Shigaraki." Shigaraki would sigh before turning away. "For now, we wait," is all Shigaraki could say. Some time would pass as we go into Season 2. The UA meeting would still happen, with them concluding Shigaraki is a man-child, as well as the fact that there may be a traitor in their midst. Class the next day would be interesting, with Kirishima just as pumped despite his injury, though he did have a slight scar on his face where Shigaraki managed to slightly injure him. Aizawa would still come in, like the mother flippin' G that he is, and announce the sports festival. Honestly, I'll say this as a longtime fan. I dislike the school-centered arcs, or the student-centered arcs. Thus, I may end up skipping a lot here, but I'll do my best to give a good description of the events. Aizawa would explain the importance of the festival, saying that it was the students' chance to show off and hopefully get into a good hero agency. During lunch, Izuku would ask Ochako why she wants to become a hero, and she'd explain that she wants to become wealthy, though only to help support her parents. As a rapper once said, her motive's money, but thankfully that doesn't define morality. All Might would still call Izuku over for lunch, causing Ida and Ochako to hypothesize why, which Todoroki would overhear. All Might would mention that his power was fading and that his time limit was even less now. "Frankly, I'm running out of time as a symbol of peace, and society will need another symbol, and I pick you, young Midoriya. I entrust you with One for All." Izuku would look up to All Might, a serious look on his face. He didn't want One for All. He wanted to become number one with his own power. But he could tell, All Might was worried about something. There was another reason he was giving away the power. "I'll do my best, All Might." Izuku would then eat a hair from All Might, thus becoming the 9th user of One for All. Izuku was just protecting this power, but he promised himself he wouldn't use it unless absolutely necessary. All Might would then tell Izuku that at the festival, he had to tell the world, "I am here." Class 1A would still interact with the normies, and they'd meet Shinzo, who'd declare war on them. War in quotation marks here. Bakugo would make more enemies, but claim it didn't matter as long as he rose up to the top. 2 weeks would go by, with every member of the school training hard for the festival. In these 2 weeks, Izuku noticed that using Earthbending had become easier. His earth walls were taller and thicker, yet they didn't make his hands turn to stone as quickly. His quirk had gotten stronger. It was like his quirk was on steroids. The One for All boosted his quirk too, huh? Anyways, the day of the festival would come, and Todoroki singled out the strongest member of his class. Todoroki would declare that he'd beat Izuku, to which Izuku would smile at. "I think I know what you mean, Todoroki. I'm aiming to beat you too." Todoroki would respond with a simple yeah before walking away. As the class walked out into the stadium, Izuku would think about everyone who was participating. All of them. They were all aiming for the top. All trying to show the world that they were here. That they were going to become great heroes or great whatever they wanted to be. Izuku would be the first year representative though, since he did do better on the entrance exams. See, I pay attention to continuity. Izuku would step up to the microphone, not knowing what to say. "I pledge to do my best, to aim to be number one, just like I know everyone else is trying to do. I'm trying to beat all of you, and I hope you guys are thinking the same things." It's definitely not a top 10 speech, but it was far better than Bakugo's. And this actually kind of pumps some people up, like Kirishima and that metal dude who's basically Kirishima. But that, fam, is where we'll be leaving things for now. How do you think the sports festival will turn out? What changes will Trench and Stitchman have on the story? And will Izuku be able to get over his pride and use One for All? Hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to like and subscribe. Have a good one. Bye bye.